Thank you all for joining us for the Launching the Leader in You workshop. Joining us today is Kweisi Ausar, Professor in Residence Hospitality. He's going to introduce us the leadership development frameworks that can be applied to our current work situation. I'm going to hand it over to him to get us started.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that introduction. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I enjoy having faces to look at. So if you want to turn your camera on, you certainly can. But no problem if you can't. Let me just start by letting you know that I spent 23 years in the restaurant industry, working first and foremost as an employee, uh, all the way up to a senior level manager. So as you hear me talk about leadership, I will try to be careful to preface it by explaining what level I'm talking about, because my perspectives are at the management level, they're at the general manager level, they're at the director level or mid-manager level, and they're also at the senior manager level. So I have a broad range of experiences, practical experiences in leadership. In terms of my academic experience with leadership, I've been with UNLV 11 years now. I work in a hospitality college, and a big part of my research agenda has been focused on leadership, more specifically moral leadership, ethical leadership, um, and workplace spirituality. So, with nothing further, let's go ahead and get into the presentation. So, so the idea here is that I'm going to share information that I hope will be useful to you, as you pursue leadership roles. One assumption that I make is that if you've dialed into this workshop, you probably have some either are in a current leadership position or some aspiration to be a leader. So I'll be speaking specifically, to those types of interest. Next slide. So the agenda, what we're going to talk about here, we're going to define and differentiate management and leadership, because too often these things are viewed as being synonymous. We're going to identify appropriate leadership styles given a particular situation. And we're also going to spend a little bit of time talking about the art and science of coaching, because coaching is a key style, a key leadership style, that I sort of hung my hat on when I was in industry. And it's one that I expound upon when I'm teaching courses on leadership. And then finally, we want to discuss how do we achieve goals? What kind of tactics can we use to help our team not just meet the expectation, but exceed it. Next slide, please. So first, I want to ask you some questions in the form of, I don't know, a survey, I guess. It's like 4 or 5 questions. If you want to put those questions up, what would be useful to me in terms of getting a better understanding of who I'm talking to, as well as, to help me make a point, if you would just take a moment and answer these questions. There's 4 questions here. I'd appreciate it. I think we got the timer set for 2 minutes or a minute and a half now. I can't see how many, have answered, but once we get to the ideal number, you can show the results, please. Yeah, I don't want to talk while you guys are reading, so I'm going to try to be quiet. All right, so the results are in.
So 3 out of 17 people said more than 1 year, but less than 2 years. 4 out of 17 said more than 2 years, but less than 5 years. And then 6 people said more than 5 years for the question 1.
Okay. All right, so 3.0. Okay. Question 3. What is your leadership experience? So we have quite a bit of leadership experience here, or we've got at least the majority of you have at least 2 years. So that's good. And the final question is, what will be the most important factor? And 29 of you, oh no, I'm sorry, 41% of you said your leadership experience. Very good. So let's close the poll. So I've got that as sort of a data point for me. I'm talking to a little more experienced group here. So some of this you may already know, but when employers or when leaders, higher level leaders, select leaders, one of the key indicators is, does this person have any leadership experience? And if one doesn't have leadership experience, what does the work experience look like relative to the leader position or the leader job description? A degree isn't going to be, at least in my experience, and again, I'm coming to you from, can you go back? Thank you. I'm coming to you from the perspective of someone who worked in a Fortune 300 company. So the standards that I talk about, industry standards, are related to that experience. And I know for us, at Darden restaurants where I worked, it was critical to look at someone's past performance. Oftentimes I'd see myself in front of a graduating student, and one of the questions that I had for that person was, what was your GPA? Right? Because past performance is predictive of future performance. And if you're in a position right now where you don't have a leadership role, but you desire a leadership role, one of the first places you want to look is at your performance. Okay? Your performance evaluations are critical, to any kind of self-evaluation around performance. So let's talk about leadership and management. Next slide, please. How are they different? Because clearly there are distinctions. So this is open right now. So I want to hear from you. How do you see them being different?
You can type them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself as well.
I would love some participation. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader. Oh, excellent point. Excellent point. Leadership is often informal. Sometimes those who are in charge aren't really, the real leaders. Anyone else? Thank you for that comment, Nicole. I appreciate that. Okay, so they are different. They're separate and distinct. Next slide, please. Some of the distinctions are around this idea that we manage things and we lead people. We don't manage people. Okay. So if you don't get anything else from this workshop, I do want you to walk away with the understanding that, we lead people. We inspire people, we develop people, we get people to innovate. Management is about maintaining the status quo. Leadership is about change. Management is about the short term, leadership is about the long term. Management is much more tactical, than leadership. Leadership is strategic. Management tends to be a reactive component of within organizations, whereas leadership is more proactive. And this is one of my favorites. Management is much more about policy. Leadership is much more about principle. In bureaucratic systems, oftentimes there isn't much leadership because, in a bureaucratic system, it's about the policy, it's about the rule, it's very process and system oriented, and it's about the processes and the systems, not necessarily about the people and achieving the goal. So next slide, please. So next question is, how do these concepts overlap?
We also had a couple of comments
We
before
did?
we
Okay.
moved on. Yeah, Jessica said a manager is a formal role or title that means you're responsible for others on paper, but a leader impacts a team in ways beyond technical management.
Yes.
Dana agrees. I think the same. You can lead from any position. Marlena said leaders have intentionality.
Yes, absolutely. All of the above are true. Um, you know, organizations oftentimes view a manager as a leader. They spend an incredible amount of time teaching, people management skills, but oftentimes lack in teaching people leadership skills. So management is about the what we're going to do. Leadership is about how we do it. And the extent to which um, someone understands that just getting a result, getting a number, you know, um, how we get that number is almost as important as the number, because sometimes we destroy future value in our short-term attempt at getting, hitting a specific performance target. So how we do things becomes just as important, as what we do. Next slide, please. So I want to take a couple minutes here, and talk about this definition, because I think it's the cleanest and most profound definition of leadership that I've come across. Um, Basically, leadership is a process. It's not an event, right? It's an interactive process that involves a relationship between a leader and follower. So this process is ongoing, and the intention of the process is to influence, right? How do we influence others? How do we communicate our ideas, we create conditions where people are motivated. I do a lot of research on workplace spirituality, and it's important to me when we are influencing followers that we do so in a way that creates the condition in which they can derive greater meaning and purpose from what they do. You know, that brings forward, intrinsic satisfaction. That increases motivation, that increases commitment. How we influence, and we'll talk a little bit more about influencing in a minute, is so important. Um, there are some leaders who use coercion to influence. I'll just tell you a real quick little story. When I was a restaurant manager, I had a director of operation who came into the restaurant and asked me why my waste was high. I was responsible for managing food costs. And so the waste numbers around seafood, beef, and chicken were high. And he wanted to know, like, what I was doing to get that number down. And I guess, my response wasn't appropriate. I was a new manager. And I said, I'm really trying to get these costs down. And he said, well, you know what? If I put a gun to your head, do you think you could get these costs down? Now I thought he was kidding, right? But he didn't blink, right? Now this was back in the 80s. I mean, you get fired for saying something like that these days. But he said that. And so what I did, I said, okay, you want the numbers down? I'll get the numbers down. I went back and changed the inventory sheet to reflect what he wanted it to reflect. In other words, I fudged the numbers. Fear, threat, intimidation, coercive means of leadership in terms of influencing is the wrong way to do it, because people will do things that they wouldn't normally do out of fear. Okay? Things that can hurt the business, and in some cases ultimately destroy the business. So we've established that leadership is a process. It's a back and forth of influencing a group of organized people. So leadership happens in the group context always, okay, to accomplish the goal. All right. The goal, if there's no goal, there's no leadership. All right. I had a manager when I was a general manager. I had a manager who wanted to be a general manager, and I was working with her, getting her prepared. I knew that the senior vice president was coming to town, and I wanted her to shine and to get his favor and ultimately get promoted. And so he shows up, and she's got the restaurant sparkling clean. You could eat off the floor. Everything is organized. All of the I's dotted, all the T's crossed. It was a beautiful sight, right? So we work the lunch shift, and then we sit down to talk after the lunch shift is over. And I'm thinking, well, he's got to be impressed with her. And so he pulls out his papers, and he pulls out our P&L, our profit and loss statement, and he starts to look at her metrics, her target. Is she hitting target? Is she above or below last year in certain metrics? And I was blindsided by that, right? Because I hadn't really gone over that with her. I wasn't prepared for that conversation. But he pretty much ripped the situation apart by saying that she's missing 4 of the 5 key metrics. And I felt terrible because I felt like it was my fault because I hadn't prepared her. I hadn't focused on the right things. I kept talking about how I was developing her leadership. And when she got up and walked away, he said to me, he said, I don't know what you've been developing, but it hasn't been leadership, because leadership is about accomplishing the goal. Okay. And I will, obviously I grew from that moment. She ultimately got promoted, and so did I down the line. But that was a defining moment for me that taught me, what leadership is supposed to produce. And I will go further and tell you, if you are someone who aspires to be a leader, it is not about meeting the goal. It's about exceeding the goal. Okay, those are the folks who get promoted. Those are the folks that get recognition. Meeting the goal. When everybody's performing below the goal, meeting the goal can seem like a great feat, but it's really not. Okay, it's about exceeding the goal. Next slide, please. So we talked a little bit about the fact that leadership involves influence. Now, there's many different ways, and I talked about coercion, right? I talked about the negative way in which we can influence others, and I caution you, not to make that a default. If I have to threaten or if I feel like I have to punish someone or threaten them, or then they shouldn't be working for me. I mean, it just shouldn't be happening, right? So influence, the right kind of influence is done through inspiration and passion. Inspiration is about the power that we have in us to move the emotions of others. Um, you know, some leaders can articulate a high resolution picture of the future that they want to create, so much so in such vivid detail that their followers can see it. Okay. And oftentimes when you can see it, you will believe it. So inspiration is at the top of the list. We talk a lot about charismatic leadership, in my courses. And not everyone is born with the ability to inspire in these kinds of ways. But I have seen individuals practice, develop their ability to articulate a clear and compelling vision. I've seen people who didn't have it naturally, innately, but who worked hard and developed the ability to inspire others. persuasion is also a really important component piece of influence. When we are persuading someone, I think it's a mix of both emotion and reason. And the process is in getting them to see, what you see. When we we talk about reason, whatever we're asking people to do, we should be prepared with explanations. We should be prepared, sometimes with justification. Um, as time has gone on, I've seen, generation after generation now increasingly want to know why. Why do I have to change? Why do I have to do it this way? We did it that way yesterday, and we've been doing it this way for years, and now we've got to do it differently. So strong leadership is prepared to explain, prepared to justify, and provide the rationale as to why. At the end of the day, many of our followers are smart people, and they've got good questions. So being able to reason to a logical conclusion is really important in leadership. So it's both emotional and rational. Next slide, please. So a couple theories I want to talk about is leader member exchange theory and path goal theory. There's so many different theoretical frameworks when we talk about leadership. There's leadership as a trait, leadership as a behavior, leadership as a situation, and we're going to talk a little bit about situational leadership. But there's so many different lenses through which we can view leadership. I think leader member exchange and goal path theory are ideal for this particular type of workshop. Next slide, please. So leader member exchange theory. Go ahead. One more slide. So oftentimes we think of leadership as a leader behaving towards a group or treating a group as a whole. And while that idea, does have some validity, in actuality, leadership is much more about a dyadic relationship between the leader and each follower. So this theory brings that focal point to the process. So it's not about how I treat the whole, but it's about how I treat as a leader each individual follower. Next slide, please. Now, anyone that's worked in an organizational context knows that there are some people who are in and some people who are out. And in leader member exchange, this is sort of characterized by the strength of the relationship. So these series of dyads represent, first people who are in the in group who have a strong or a high quality relationship or exchange with their followers on an individual basis, with those people on the in group. And then those people on the out group have a very low exchange relationship with the leader. In order for a leader to accomplish his or her goals, you need everybody in. Everyone needs to be in the in group. It's difficult sometimes when you have personality differences, you have demographic differences, you have gender differences. I mean, there are a plethora of differences that create conditions where people feel like or people are in the out group. Next slide, please. So this theory suggests that leadership making is the way to navigate these in-group, out-group dynamics. And let me say this first of all, it's incumbent upon the leader to make sure that they have a high quality exchange relationship with their followers. The onus is not on the follower. Now I said that, but I'm also going to say that if you work for a leader who doesn't engage you, who for example, on this slide here, I've seen people work for years for someone and remain in the stranger phase. They just don't know the person. The influence is one way, low quality exchange. Okay. And I can tell you a story. I was, when I was a senior director, I picked up a region in Michigan, and I went on a tour of restaurants with the director. And this is a new director, that came under my watch. And we went into his restaurant, and he didn't speak to anybody, none of the crew, none of the employees. Like, he didn't even speak to the manager. He went straight to the office looking for the general manager. And I was like, wow, that's really strange. It's like you don't walk past. I mean, yeah, we're in the restaurant industry. It's called hospitality, right? We don't walk past our people and not speak to them. So it just threw me way off. So I followed him, and I just observed him along the way. And he had absolutely no relationships with the people that were working in his restaurant, nor did he have with the managers. His thought was, my responsibility is to lead the general manager, and that's the only focus and that's the only exchange that I'm concerned about. And I had never seen that before. Okay. So I say that to say that sometimes leaders are just unaware of the importance of developing partnerships with all people that work for them, all up and down all levels. In my view, there's no big me and little you. It's, we're a team. I just have a different role as a leader, but we're all in this together. That's kind of how I've always viewed it. Now, leader member exchange and leadership making suggest that there are three phases to this interaction. This exchange between a leader and the followers. And over time, you move out of the stranger phase to the acquaintance phase, right? Where influences, now I have a little bit of influence on the leader. The leader has given me some expanded roles. There's some trust beginning to develop. The interests are not just in the self, but also in others. And the idea is to get everyone on the team to the partnership level, where there's a high quality exchange, where not only am I influencing as a leader, but I'm allowing my followers to influence me as well, because it is an exchange. I'm giving not just the same people opportunities to do things that are special or things that contribute to their growth and development, but I'm spreading the wealth, and I'm giving others opportunities as well as a leader. So you develop these partnerships with everyone on the team. Now, it becomes difficult when the leader doesn't understand this, or doesn't engage, or doesn't see these different phases that occur when we have these exchanges. Followers can influence. Followers can influence the leader. And I'm not talking about manipulation here. I'm talking about, creating a sit down, creating a situation in which you express your desire for more, to learn more, to be involved more, to get access to different roles. So, followers aren't helpless, you know, and there's been very few jobs where I've stayed stuck for very long. If there's no path forward, yeah, I'm usually looking for a better opportunity. But I was fortunate for 23 years to work for an organization that in which we had high quality exchanges. I knew that my leader had my best interest at heart. And for the leaders out there, you know, um, followers need to know that. They need to know that the leader cares about them and has their best interest at heart. Like, and when I say a high quality exchange, I'm not talking about a close personal relationship. Okay, I'm not talking about somebody being my friend. I'm talking about having a reciprocal exchange with every person on the team that makes them, feel like and makes them feel included as a part of the end team. Everybody has to be in. Nobody's out. You just can't achieve an optimal goal without all the clogs in the wheels turning. Next slide, please. So goal path theory. Let's talk a little bit about that, since at the end of the day, it is about the goal. Next slide, please. So this particular theoretical framework focuses on the situation, okay? And the emphasis is placed on being adaptive, right? We've already learned that we've got to create high quality exchanges with everyone that's on the team. So everybody needs a little bit, something a little bit different. I remember when I got promoted to my first director's role, and I was a pretty good general manager, but when I got put into the director's role, now I have 7 other general managers who, by the way, had 20 plus years of experience with the company. I only had 14. So here I come, and now I'm going to tell them how to run their restaurants. Um, and at first I treated them all the same, or I thought I was, right. Here's what we're going to do. Every restaurant is going to run exactly how I ran my restaurant. It took me about a year of bumping my head against the wall to figure out that each one of them was different, and they needed something different from me. So my style needed to be different for each one of them. This situational leadership perspective is used widely. I mean, in all sorts of organizations when it comes to training and development. So let's go to the next slide, please. So leadership style. Now, there's a plethora of leadership styles, right? There's so many. This sort of categorizes styles based on behavior. Okay, so what kind of behavior does a leader exhibit when they attempt to influence someone? Now, all of us, all of us have a default leadership style. I often ask people, well, what's your leadership style? And oftentimes they don't know. Um, Oftentimes, a person's leadership style is determined by their past experiences, because we adapt other people's styles. When I was a GM in Pittsburgh, I had a coercive leader who didn't care about people at all. All he cared about was metrics, numbers. He would fire someone in a heartbeat. It was all one-way communication. It was no two-way communication. I remember showing up for work one day, and he had faxed me a write-up. Like, he had written me up and faxed it to me. Like, that's how, insane this guy was in terms of coercion. I don't know how I survived him, because 80% of us didn't. But I learned a lot from him, and what I learned was how not to treat people. Okay. So suffice to say that in this particular example, I'm just going to talk about 2 different types of behaviors relative to how we influence others. This next slide, please, is a little complicated, and I, sort of hesitated about putting this up, but I'm going to try to explain it, as simple as I can. When we look at the developmental needs of our followers, and now I'm on the low line across the bottom of the slide. When we look at the developmental needs of our people, everyone's at a different place, right? There's someone who's new coming into the organization probably comes in with a high commitment, but low competence. They really don't know. They haven't been trained, they haven't been developed, but they're committed to doing whatever it is that we ask them. Most times that's someone that's new. The next phase of development is considered someone who is low or has some competence, but low commitment. Commitment is a very important factor in leadership. When people aren't committed, they're not motivated. When people aren't committed, they are much more likely to leave. When people are not committed, the performance indicators are lower. So commitment is a really important aspect of development. Now, how do you get someone uh, to, how do you raise someone's commitment? Well, situational leadership would suggest that you raise their competence level. You know, and that is done through coaching. So, directly adjacent to D2 is S2, which is the coaching box, where leader behaviors are both highly directive and highly supportive. So I'm going to go back to the example of when I became a new director and I had all these experienced general managers under me and they all needed something different. Um, about four of them didn't need me to tell them how to run their restaurants. They knew how to run their restaurants. They didn't need a lot of direction. They needed support. They needed to know that I cared about them. They needed to know that I was there for them to help them solve problems. They needed to know that, I had their backs. So they needed S3 leadership. They needed supporting leadership, low directive, high supportive. Okay. They were not only committed because they've been doing it longer than I had, but they also had a high level of competence. Okay. Most of them. So as you can see how this sort of vacillates from low competence to high competence, D4, people who are D4 still need to be stimulated. People who are high achievers, why do organizations lose their best people? A lot of research is done around this from a leadership perspective. And one of the things that has been indicated is that good people leave because nobody cares anymore. They're not getting developed. They're not getting attention. Most leaders are focused on the middle 80, and in Fortune 300 companies, most leaders are focused intensely on the bottom 20%. You know, um, I know that we had a policy that if you were needs improvement for more than 1 year, you got put on notice. And the second time you had a year of needs improvement performance, you were terminated. Jack Welch made famous this concept of differentiation, where every year at General Electric, he would fire the bottom 10%. There wasn't even a question. It was a policy. Like if you ranked in the bottom 10% on performance, you better be looking for another job. Everybody knew it. So, every yeah, that's a coercive way of leading to some extent. But, General Electric is arguably one of the, best run company or most profitable companies, over the last, 100 years or so. So non-performance has to be dealt with, and we'll get to that in a minute. But situational leadership is about looking at the individual and determining where they are in terms of their developmental needs or developmental levels, and then applying the right balance of directive and supportive behaviors. Um, I'll just tell this real quick story. I had a general manager in, no, I'm sorry, it was a director of operations in Canada. I supervised all of our business in Canada for a period of time. And when I first went to the country, there was one director, who had a region of restaurants that was underperforming, totally underperforming the rest of Canada and most of the United States. And what I found out, one of the reasons that he was such a underperforming director was because he was off the chart supportive. In other words, the needs of his people trumped the needs of the business. So he put people before the business. So I ended up having to close 2 restaurants in his region because they had fallen so far that there was just no way to bring them back. And ultimately he lost his job. So there is and I tell that story because you know you can't be supportive to the extent that you put the business at jeopardy. Because if there's no business, there's definitely no people. So this is a good. I don't have time to break every section of this down, but you know, coaching is something that I totally believe in, and we're going to talk about coaching coming up next. Next slide, please. So the art and science of coaching. You can go ahead and click the next slide. Now, of all the leadership styles, right, coaching has been found to be the most effective in sustaining high levels of performance. However, research shows that coaching is the most least used leadership style. My question to you is, why is that? If coaching is the most effective, yes, it is time consuming. It does require skill. These are great points. Anything else? You have to teach someone, you're right, you have to teach someone how to be an effective coach. Excellent points. Next slide, please. So there's been research done on the effects of coaching as it relates to training, right? So when we follow training up with coaching, not only do we get greater results, but behaviors are sustained. In hospitality, behaviors become very, very critical to success, whether it's customer service behaviors or peer-to-peer behaviors. Organizations that build coaching into the performance management system. In other words, you've got talent acquisition, talent selection, you've got training, and then you have development. And oftentimes, development gets missed or is not focused on coaching. What people don't there's a presumption that people don't want to be coached. And I tell you what, that's partly true because coaching is often done from a negative perspective. But when you create a coaching culture where it naturally flows from training, people expect to get feedback. People expect to get better. Working for a Fortune 300 company, we had to prove to Wall Street every quarter that we could get better. And the results had to consistently over time get better and better and better. Customer expectations changed. They get higher and higher. So does the behaviors and the results of the units. They all need to get better. So coaching is a great way to not only increase, but to sustain results. Because anybody can put a number up on the board, but can you year over year continuously improve that number? That's the value of coaching in leadership. Tremendous value. To the points that were made earlier, yes, it does take time. It takes time to teach leaders how to coach. It takes time for the leader to coach, but it's the best investment you can make. I had a general manager, and I'll just call his name, Jim Duffy, who was exceptional at this. And I go to Jim's restaurant, and he'd be standing around, doing nothing because his people were high performing people. He had coached them to the extent that his restaurant ran like a well-oiled machine. He had a Not only did he have no turnover, he had a waiting list of people wanting to work there. Now, when was the last time you ever heard of a restaurant that had a waiting list of people who want to work there? And it was all predicated on his commitment to coaching. Next slide, please. So, lastly, we talked about goals. And in the context of performance-based coaching, um, let me just say this. Everybody's got to perform. Okay. If you're going to be on the team, you have to perform. Now, again, I'm talking from the perspective of someone working in a Fortune 300 company, right? Everyone has to perform. So how performance is assessed and how performance fits into this context is really important. You know, So everybody gets a performance evaluation, which consists of their results compared to, I don't know, target or prior year, their results compared to the leader's observation. The leader's observation has to be not just about what the result was, but how that person got the result, right? Because we've already talked about you can destroy future value. You can get a result today that destroys future value, and that's not what we want. So leader observations is important. Feedback is important. Coaching, creates a culture where feedback is expected, respected, wanted, and feedback should always be balanced, right? We all know that you always start a feedback session with something positive, constructive, and you end on a positive in most cases. Because at the end of the day, everyone has to achieve the goal. Now, what happens if people don't achieve the goal, right? If they don't achieve the goal, we have to help them figure out what the root cause is, right? As a leader, I do not believe in writing people up. You know, I have had general managers and directors who didn't know how to get the results themselves. So how are you going to hold someone accountable when you don't even know how to get the result as a leader? So that's one of the important things about promoting people before they're ready. You know, it's critically important that a leader understand how to get results at levels below him or her. So you look for root cause, right? Sometimes, people, yeah, I have a theory, right? People don't perform for three reasons. Either A, we really haven't taught them. They don't know, right? There's something missing in the knowledge base. Number two, they don't care, which is about commitment, motivation. That's you know that's cause for someone to go and work, have to go and work somewhere else. If you don't care, that's a problem. And then third is they don't have the ability. We've put them in position, but we didn't do our due diligence to make sure that they had the ability or the capability to do what we asked them to do. That's the most unfortunate cause of people not performing. And to me, it's criminal to promote someone before they're ready. We just cannot do that. And do people, is a promotion a stretch? It's always a stretch. But if you weren't if you weren't exceeding the expectation at the prior level, then we aren't setting you up for success by promoting you. So consequences, people have to perform. I was told a long time ago that if the consequences aren't significant enough, the behavior will not change. So consequences have to have significance. That's good and bad. So let's go to goals are achieved. It's equally important that people get recognized and rewarded for performance that exceeds the goal. Let me say that again. We don't reward people for meeting the goal. Rewards happen when individuals exceed the goal. There's a huge differential there. And oftentimes in low performing cultures, people are rewarded for achieving a goal. You get to keep your job if maybe that's a little too hard, but you get what I'm saying in terms of exceeding the goal. Your goal should always be to exceed. Your intention should always be to exceed. Forget about meeting. How do I exceed the goal? Because not only does that position you for um, you know, more rewards within your current job, it also positions you for a good case for getting promoted to the next level. And that's all I got. My time is 3 minutes left, so I'm open for questions.
I had a question.
Sure.
Um, so you were talking a lot about, exceeding the goal in order to move on, and advance in your career, let's say in a career that you have. I've noticed when any goal that I've been given, I've always tend to exceed it. But what I find myself in a situation now is that they don't want to move me up because I'm doing so good in the position. They don't want to move me out of that because I'm the, I don't know how to move up because I'm making them a lot of money where I'm at and they don't want to lose that. So is there a balance or a way to exceed that? Because I want to get to that management or that leadership level. And I feel like that's something that I would be really good with, but it's hard to get there when I'm exceeding all of my goals,
Sure.
you
Sure.
know.
I can offer this to you as just from an experiential perspective.
Hmm.
Um, you know, in situations like that, and I don't know the organizational culture, or any of that, but finding someone and training and developing that person to be as good or even better than you are in your current job could be a way to free yourself up.
Okay.
Now, I wouldn't, I would do that with eyes wide open and making sure that it's communicated upward that, how about let's do this? How about I take this person, I develop them to the point in which they can meet or exceed what I'm currently producing. If I did that, would you be willing to give me an opportunity to go to the next level?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I've noticed like and in the industry that I'm in, like most industries, it's very competitive. So the people that are above me, I mean, that are the ones that are going to make the decision, it, you know, it's almost I feel personally as if I'm a threat to them because of how much I'm exceeding my goal. So I feel like sometimes they don't want me to go over that because they don't want me to go over them in a way.
Do you have a relationship with the person above them?
I do, and I have been getting noticed more and more, but it just seems like I'm getting blocked by the person above me. And it's just like I'm in this kind of limbo. And
Yeah,
so, and people around me that I work with that are even in the same level that I am are saying like you're like almost like a leader to us. Like they almost listen to me more than the person above me because of, the relationships that I've created with them.
sure. Well, you can get my contact information is on the UNLV website. I'm more than happy to spend some time chatting with you about this. So just feel
Okay.
free to reach out and we can talk more about this.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Anyone
Okay.
else?
Yeah, maybe we can take one more last question because we are close to that 1 hour mark. Dr.
Okay.
Ausar,
Okay.
if anybody else have another question, please feel free to share. And I dropped the survey link in the chat. If you guys can fill this out, it really helps us facilitating further workshops for you guys to help you guys. So please take your time to fill that out. Seems like we don't have any more questions. So before we end today's session, we would like to thank to our presenter, Dr. Ausar, for sharing his time and expertise with us today, and thank to our participants for joining us today. Before you all log off, please take a few minutes to fill out the survey that I just dropped in the chat. Thank you so much, Dr. Ausar, once again.
Yeah, thanks to everyone that attended. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.